You are busy. Like, you are smart, you work hard, but um, are you actually effective?
Right. That's the real question.
Because honestly, if you're listening to this, you probably have an endless stream of Slack notifications, right? A calendar that looks like, well, a tragic game of Tetris.
Oh, completely.
And you probably end most days feeling like you ran a marathon on a treadmill. Like you moved really fast, but you went absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, you're exhausted, but you haven't actually accomplished anything of value.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into something that might make you uh, deeply uncomfortable. We're looking at why your desperate quest to be quote-unquote efficient is actually destroying your career.
It's a huge distinction because we live in this era where everyone is trying to, optimize their morning routine or reach inbox zero.
Or the inbox zero obsession.
Right, and they're trying to run their day like this high-speed assembly line. But doing things right is merely efficiency. Getting the right things done, which, spoiler alert, requires ignoring almost everything else that is effectiveness.
And that's exactly what we are unpacking today. We're looking at a truly foundational, paradigm-shifting book called The Effective Executive by Peter F. Drucker.
Yeah, it's a total classic.
But because we want to make sure these, mid-century executive theories actually translate into your daily reality, like tomorrow morning, we're also weaving in some highly actionable modern time management strategies from creator Akshat Khatri.
It's basically the perfect pairing. I mean, Drucker provides this massive structural framework, right? The philosophy, while Khatri offers the literal boots-on-the-ground toolkit.
Right. My goal for this deep dive is to constantly push you on the how and the why, because I don't just want theory.
Oh, absolutely. And to kick us off, I think we need to look at a story that illustrates just how radical effectiveness actually is.
Okay, lay it on me.
So in the mid-1960s, there was this pharmaceutical CEO. He looks at a struggling company, right? And he locks himself in his office and makes this completely irrational decision.
Okay.
He decides he is going to intentionally ignore 99% of his job.
Wait, really? Just ignore it.
Just let the fires burn. Over the next 11 years, he focused single-mindedly on only 3 specific tasks. Just 3.
That sounds like a great way to get fired, honestly.
You'd think so, right? He let the rest of the company's problems pile up. But that terrifying level of focus didn't bankrupt the company. It actually turned it into a global empire.
Wow. Okay, so that level of focus is what the book is talking about in chapter 1, right?
Right.
Where it says effectiveness can be learned.
Exactly. Drucker argues right out of the gate that effectiveness is not like a genetic trait. It's not something you're born with, like perfect pitch or something. It is a discipline. And that framing is crucial because it removes that excuse we all use, oh, I'm just not naturally organized.
Oh, I've definitely used that excuse.
Right, we all do. But Drucker points out this massive historical shift to explain why this discipline is suddenly so vital today.
The shift from manual to knowledge work.
Precisely. For most of human history, organizations relied almost entirely on manual workers. And manual work is, well, it's wonderfully simple to measure.
Because you can actually see it, like how many pairs of shoes did you make?
Exactly. How many tons of coal did you mine? The output is tangible. You can put a stopwatch on a manual laborer.
But almost none of us listening to this right now are doing manual labor. Like, we're what the book calls knowledge workers. We use our brains, not our muscles.
And that's the problem. You cannot put a stopwatch on a thought.
Right. If I'm staring out the window at, like, 2 p.m., my boss has absolutely no idea if I'm daydreaming about what I'm having for dinner.
What happened?
Which definitely happens. Or if I am mentally restructuring some logistics pipeline that's going to save the company $4 million.
Right. The system of supervision that humanity spent centuries perfecting is completely useless for you. A knowledge worker cannot be supervised closely. They have to direct themselves.
And because of that, the book completely redefines what it means to be an executive.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need a corner office to be an executive.
Yeah. No, not at all. Drucker argues that every knowledge worker whose decisions impact the organization's performance is an executive, period.
I love the example the book uses for this. There's this story about a young American infantry captain fighting in the thick jungles of the Vietnam War.
Oh, yeah. This is a great one.
And a reporter finds him in the middle of this chaotic life-or-death firefight and asks, how in this confused situation can you retain command? And the captain basically laughs and says, around here, I'm only the guy who is responsible. The decision lies with whoever's on the spot.
It's such a brilliant illustration because in a guerrilla war or, in a fast-paced modern tech company, The center of decision-making shifts outward.
It doesn't live at headquarters anymore.
Right. The person on the spot is the only one with the immediate context to make the call. So if your daily decisions affect the whole, you are an executive.
Okay, so if we're all executives, right,
Yeah.
and we have the power to make these decisions, why do we feel so paralyzed? Like, why do I open my laptop with 3 big goals for the day, and by 5 p.m. I haven't touched a single one of them?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at the invisible forces working against us. Drucker outlines 4 brutal realities that naturally push every executive toward ineffectiveness.
Okay.
And these are just baked into the structure of working with other people. First, your time belongs to everybody else. You're a captive.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyone can just drop a meeting on your calendar or ping you on Slack with an urgent request.
Right. The second reality is you are forced to keep operating, which means putting out daily fires unless you take deliberate action to stop.
If you let the flow of events determine your day, you're not an executive. You're just a reactive operator.
Exactly. And the third reality compounds it. You are trapped inside the organization. Your work is completely abstract until someone else uses it.
What do you mean by abstract?
Like, a data scientist can build the most elegant predictive model in the world, but if the sales team doesn't understand it or use it, that model is worthless.
Oh, wow. Yeah, your effectiveness is entirely dependent on other people.
Which brings us to the fourth reality. And this is the big one. We are insulated from the outside world.
This makes me think of like a massive astronomical phenomenon.
How so?
Well, if you think of an organization like a corporation, a hospital, whatever, it acts like a giant celestial body. And because of its massive size, it exerts this overwhelming organizational gravity.
The organizational gravity, I love that.
Yeah, so this gravity naturally pulls all of your attention inward. You get sucked into internal friction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Office politics, the new HR software rollout, department gossip.
Budget disputes.
Exactly. And if you don't actively fire your thrusters to break orbit and look outward, you just get trapped in the core of this planet. And the terrifying part is that there are no results inside an organization.
Right. Inside, there are only costs.
The actual results, the customers, the revenue, the impact, they only exist in the outside universe.
That is the tragedy of the modern worker right there. We spend 90% of our energy fighting that organizational gravity, managing internal costs, and we never actually reach the outside world.
Because we let the flow of events dictate our day.
And we do that because we suffer from this profound delusion. We think we know where our time goes.
Oh, we don't.
We really don't. Which pushes us perfectly into chapter 2. Know thy time.
The time deficit.
Yeah. Time is the ultimate inelastic resource. I mean, you can raise more capital, you can hire more engineers, you can rent more server space, but you cannot rent, hire, buy, or manufacture more time.
But human biology makes us completely incapable of accurately tracking it in our heads.
We are notoriously terrible witnesses to our own lives. There's this brilliant anecdote in the book about a highly respected company chairman.
Oh, the guy who thought he was super balanced.
Yes. This man was absolutely convinced that he was the model of executive balance. He swore up and down that he divided his time equally into 3 buckets.
What were they?
Advising senior men, visiting important customers, and engaging in community work.
Okay, on paper, that sounds like a fantastic visionary leader.
Right. In his imagination, he was crushing it. But his secretary actually tracked his time down to the minute for 6 weeks.
Oh, no. I can feel where this is going.
When she presented the log to him, he discovered he spent almost none of his time in those 3 visionary areas.
So he was caught in the gravity well. What was he actually doing?
He was acting as a glorified dispatcher. He was taking phone calls from customers he knew personally and then calling the manufacturing plant to bother them about fulfilling the orders.
Wait, orders that were already in the system.
Yes, they were going to be fulfilled anyway. He was just injecting himself into the operations, getting in the way, and completely wasting his own scarce resource.
He was a micromanager disguised as a chairman. And he probably felt incredibly productive while he was doing it, right? Because he was moving things along.
Oh, he didn't even believe the secretary's time log at first. He made her do it again.
That is hilarious, but also kind of scary.
It is. And that's why Drucker is so emphatic here. The very first step to effectiveness is recording time, not planning it.
Because planning your time before you know where it actually goes is basically just writing a work of fiction.
Exactly. You have to log in real time for weeks to see the ugly truth.
Okay, so let's say I take the bitter pill. I log my time. I realize I'm spending 14 hours a week in useless sync meetings and 5 hours responding to emails that literally don't matter. Now what? How do I prune this overgrown garden?
You apply the pruning process by asking 3 incredibly harsh questions.
Hit me.
First question, what would happen if this task wasn't done at all?
And if the honest answer,
It is a painful mirror to look into. Drucker gives this example of a senior financial executive who invited everyone in his entire department to every meeting he held.
why?
Well, he did it out of a misguided sense of egalitarianism. He thought, oh, I don't want anyone to feel left out.
But he was just holding them hostage.
Exactly. When he finally swallowed his pride and asked his team, they admitted they felt their time was being completely disrespected.
Because they were sitting in these massive, bloated meetings just to watch him talk.
Right. So he cut the attendance down to 3 essential people, and departmental productivity skyrocketed.
So we're talking about our personal time wasters.
Mm-hmm.
But the book also calls out systemic time wasters, right? Like things the organization itself does poorly.
Yes, like the recurrent crisis.
Right. If your company has a massive panicked scramble every single December to close the inventory books, that isn't a crisis.
No, a crisis is an earthquake.
Exactly. If it happens every December, it's a failure of routine. You should build a system for it so it runs automatically.
Another systemic failure is malorganization. And the primary symptom of that is an epidemic of meetings.
Ugh, meetings.
The book mentions an energy company that split itself into 3 divisions: traditional power, jet power, and atomic power.
Sounds logical.
It does, but because they didn't design the communication channels properly, the executives ended up spending all their time in endless cross-divisional meetings just to figure out what the other divisions were doing.
Wow.
Drucker says if you are spending a quarter of your time in meetings, the organization is fundamentally malfunctioning.
All right, I want to pivot from the mid-century corporate theory to the modern reality here.
Okay, let's do it.
Because let's say I track my time, I see the malorganization, and I really want to reclaim my day. This is where we promise to bring in the tactical toolkit from Akshat Khatri, because I need to know the mechanism of how to start my day differently tomorrow morning.
Khatri's framework bridges this gap perfectly, and it actually starts with a psychological reset.
What kind of reset?
Before you implement any tactic, you have to adopt a new mindset. Procrastination is not a moral failing. It is a systemic failure.
Oh, that is incredibly liberating.
Oof.
Because when we procrastinate, we tend to fall into this shame spiral.
Always.
We think we are lazy or undisciplined. But Khatri is saying, no, your system is just broken. Forgive yourself, drop the guilt, and reboot the system.
Precisely. Once you drop the guilt, you deploy his 4-part toolkit.
Okay, what's tactic 1?
Write down the next day's tasks in a physical notebook the night before. You do not wake up and try to decide what to do.
Because decision fatigue is real.
It's very real. The choice must be made when you are clear-headed the night before.
That prevents you from opening your laptop and just reacting to whatever email is at the top of the pile.
Exactly. What is the second tactic?
Well, you tell me.
Oh, right. This one is non-negotiable. Do not touch your phone immediately upon waking up.
Okay, let's explore the why behind that.
Yeah.
Why is the phone so destructive in the first 20 minutes of the day?
It actually comes down to neurobiology and the cortisol awakening response.
What?
So when you wake up, your brain is transitioning out of theta waves into beta waves. You are in a highly suggestible, programmable state.
Okay.
If the first thing you do is look at social media or your inbox, you are flooded with dopamine spikes from the novelty, intertwined with stress hormones from the demands of others.
Because you're seeing your boss's urgent email before you're even out of bed.
Right. You are actively handing the steering wheel of your brain over to the outside world. You are surrendering to that organizational gravity before you've even had a glass of water.
You are literally letting someone else program your neurochemistry for the day. That makes so much sense. Okay, what's tactic 3?
The 90-minute rule. You carve out one 90-minute block of time to focus on your single most important priority task.
So I can't bring, like, 3 tasks into this block.
No, do not bring 3 tasks, just
Okay.
one. And tactic 4 is to use the Pomodoro technique within that block. So 25 minutes of deep focus, followed by a 5-minute break, and you just repeat that.
And this maps perfectly onto Drucker's philosophy, doesn't it?
It really does. In the book, Drucker explicitly states that executives need time in large, continuous, and uninterrupted units.
Right, because if you only have 15 minutes between meetings, you can answer an email, but you cannot write what Drucker calls a zero draft of a complex strategic report.
Exactly. You can't think deeply about a difficult personnel decision in 15 minutes. Knowledge work requires long runways to take off. Khatri's 90-minute block is the exact runway Drucker is demanding.
Okay, but carving out the time is only half the battle. Once you sit down in that quiet, uninterrupted 90-minute block,
Hmm.
what do you actually look at? Where do you direct your focus?
That brings us to Chapter 3. What can I contribute? Because Drucker warns that the vast majority of executives use their time to focus downward.
Downward focus, meaning they are obsessed with their own jurisdiction, their subordinates, and what the organization owes them.
Yes, they are fiercely protective of their turf. But the effective executive shifts their gaze outward.
To the universe outside the planet.
Right. They ask one fundamental question. What can I contribute that will significantly affect the performance and the results of the institution I serve?
I think that is a deeply uncomfortable question to ask yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if you sit at your desk and seriously ask, how do I justify my spot on the payroll today? You might not like the answer.
It exposes a lot of busy work, that's for sure. The book shares a story about a management consultant who would start every engagement by walking into the offices of senior executives and asking them directly, what do you do that justifies your being on the payroll?
That's aggressive. What do they say?
Well, most of them would give completely the wrong answer.
Let me guess.
Yeah.
They would state their title or their head count, like, I manage an 80-person accounting department, or I oversee the North American supply chain.
Exactly. They described their effort and their status. But the effective answer sounds completely different.
What does it sound like?
It sounds like, I give our frontline managers the financial data they need to make the right pricing decisions. Or, I figure out what products the customer will demand 2 years from now.
The difference is profound. The bad answer is all about the inputs. The good answer is entirely focused on the output and how it serves someone else.
Yes. And the book outlines 3 specific areas where we should be focusing this contribution.
Right. First is direct results.
Yeah.
That is the obvious one. Revenue, patient outcomes, code shipped.
Second is building and reaffirming values. An organization is a human community, right? It needs to stand for something beyond just existing.
And third is developing people for tomorrow. Because if you are not actively mentoring and building the next generation of leadership, the organization will eventually just collapse.
Exactly.
I want to talk about how this applies to highly specialized people, though, like the data scientists, the legal counsel, the senior engineers, because experts are often the worst offenders when it comes to contribution.
They really are. They get so wrapped up in the beauty of their own discipline that they become useless to the rest of the company.
Yes. So how does Drucker address this?
He points out the massive danger of experts who communicate at people rather than for them.
Okay, explain that.
There is a fascinating case study in the book about a government scientific agency. So the agency hired a new publications director who was a highly polished, talented science writer.
Okay.
He revamped all their publications, making them look incredibly professional and sophisticated.
On paper, that sounds like a massive success. He upgraded the output.
But in reality, it was a total disaster. The scientific community the agency was supposed to serve actually stopped reading the materials.
Wait, why?
Well, finally, a highly respected scientist pulled the agency head aside and explained the problem. He said, the former director was writing for us. Your new man writes at us.
Wow. The new guy wasn't asking what contribution the readers needed. He was just using the publications as a vanity project to showcase his own linguistic skills.
Exactly. Writing for someone requires empathy and a focus on contribution. Writing at someone is pure ego.
That makes total sense.
And this outward focus on contribution is actually the secret mechanism for solving one of the most toxic elements of corporate life: office politics.
Okay, I have to challenge this.
Challenge away.
Office politics are driven by human ego, jealousy, and miscommunication. How does simply asking, what can I contribute, fix the nightmare of human relations in a corporate matrix?
Because Drucker radically redefines what good human relations actually means for an executive.
How so?
We tend to think good relations mean remembering everyone's birthday, smiling in the hallway, and having this warm, fuzzy feeling about our coworkers.
Which is exhausting to maintain, by the way.
And ultimately irrelevant to effectiveness. Good human relations in a knowledge organization mean productive, task-focused relationships.
Beck, I'm tracking.
If a team has wonderful chemistry but produces no results, it is a failed relationship. Conversely, if you occasionally exchange rough words with a colleague, but you consistently produce phenomenal results together, that relationship will survive and thrive.
So how does the contribution mindset forge that productive relationship?
By creating what Drucker calls sideways communication.
Sideways communication.
Yeah, when you focus on how your output helps the broader organization, you are forced to walk over to your peers, the people sideways to you on the org chart who you have absolutely no authority over.
Yeah.
And you ask them, what contribution from me do you require to do your job?
Oh, that completely flips the script. Instead of fighting over territory or budget, you are approaching them as a supplier of their success.
Yes.
You are asking to be useful to them. That diffuses the turf war immediately because you are aligning your goals.
It creates a web of mutual reliance. But here's the catch. If you are going to focus entirely on contributing massive value to the organization, you inevitably have to look at what you are actually capable of doing exceptionally well.
Because you cannot contribute if you are assigned to a task you are terrible at.
Exactly. Which brings us to Chapter 4, Making Strength Productive.
This is where the book introduces the concept of asymmetry, right? We spend so much time in our modern culture trying to fix people's flaws, but Drucker flips this completely.
He states that organizations exist for one primary reason: to make human weaknesses irrelevant.
I want to pause on that because it is such a bold countercultural claim to make weakness irrelevant. We don't try to fix the weakness. We make it so it doesn't matter.
You cannot build performance on weakness. You can only build on strength. Drucker illustrates this with the famous historical dynamic between President Abraham Lincoln and General Ulysses S. Grant during the American Civil War.
Okay, I know this story. The Union Army was struggling, and Lincoln finally appointed Grant to command.
Right. But Grant had a glaring, well-known weakness. He drank heavily.
Which, in a military commander, is not a minor flaw. That is a massive liability.
Lincoln's advisors were horrified. They came to him demanding he remove Grant because of the drinking. But Lincoln's response is legendary. He reportedly said, "If I knew his brand, I'd send a barrel to some other generals."
Because Grant was the only general actually winning battles.
Precisely. Lincoln had appointed 3 or 4 highly respectable, completely sober generals before Grant. They had no glaring weaknesses.
But they consistently lost campaigns.
Exactly. Lincoln realized he had to staff for the strength of winning battles, not for the absence of weakness. The absence of weakness doesn't win a war. Only asymmetric strength does.
As you're explaining this, it makes me think of an intellectual jigsaw puzzle.
How so?
Well, think about modern HR departments. We give people performance reviews where we list all their areas for improvement. We want everyone to be well-rounded.
Right, the 360 review.
Yeah. So if a jigsaw puzzle piece represents an employee, HR is essentially taking that piece and sanding down all of its wild, protruding, uniquely shaped edges until it becomes a perfectly smooth, well-rounded square.
A smooth square is safe. It has no sharp edges.
Right. It has no glaring weaknesses. But what happens when you try to build a puzzle out of smooth squares? They don't interlock. They just slide apart.
Oh, that's good.
The puzzle has no structural integrity at all. The only way a puzzle holds together is if you take the wild, protruding strength of one piece, that weirdly shaped tab, and lock it directly into the gap, the weakness of the piece next to it.
That is a phenomenal metaphor. You don't sand down the weakness. You find someone else whose protruding strength fills that exact gap. By locking those asymmetrical strengths and weaknesses together across a team, you create a structural integrity that cannot be broken.
So if we're going to build this jigsaw puzzle, what are the actual mechanics of staffing for strength?
Drucker outlines 4 vital rules. Rule 1, beware the impossible job.
The impossible job? What's that?
Organizations frequently create job descriptions that require a completely unrealistic combination of skills. Like, they want someone who is a brilliant lone wolf innovator, but also a meticulous team-building administrator.
The unicorn candidate.
Exactly. When 2 or 3 highly competent people fail in a role sequentially, it is not the people who are flawed. The job itself is an impossible Frankenstein monster and needs to be restructured.
It makes total sense. What's rule 2?
Make jobs demanding and big. The role needs enough scope and challenge so that whatever unique strength the person has can actually emerge and produce results. If the job is too small, they will just get bored and their strengths will atrophy.
And rule 3 is about how we evaluate people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Start with what a person can do, not what the job requires.
Yeah.
This means you look at their actual past performance, the things they have undeniably achieved. You do not appraise them based on some vague, subjective concept of potential or heavily penalize them for the things they can't do.
That leads to rule 4, which is the hardest pill to swallow. To get strength, you must put up with weaknesses.
You really do.
Like, if you want a brilliant paradigm-shifting software architect,
Yeah.
you might have to accept that they are terrible at answering emails or possess 0 small talk skills.
You must accept the whole package. But Drucker includes a massive warning here about the indispensable man.
Oh, I hate that phrase.
We often hear managers say, I can't possibly move Bob to a new project. He is indispensable to this department. Drucker says that is a giant red flag.
Why? Isn't being indispensable a sign of massive strength?
No, it usually masks a pathology. There are only 3 reasons someone is truly indispensable. 1, they are actually incompetent, but they are a nice person, so the manager has carved out a safe, indispensable little niche to protect them from real demands.
Ouch. Okay.
2, their strength is being actively misused to prop up a weak, incompetent boss.
I've seen that one.
Or 3, their strength is being used to conceal a fundamental structural problem in the organization that needs to be fixed.
Right. If the organization collapses because one person goes on vacation, the system is broken. Okay. I want to pivot this concept to something highly relatable for you, the listener.
Okay.
All of this theory is great if I am the CEO building the team. But what if I am mid-level? What about my boss? If my boss has glaring weaknesses and I can't fire them, how do I manage upward without destroying my own career?
This is one of the most brilliant practical takeaways in the book. Drucker says the exact same rule applies upward. You must manage the boss.
How?
You do not try to fix your boss's weaknesses or complain about their blind spots. You figure out what their specific strength is and you feed it.
What does that look like in practice?
It starts with figuring out how your boss processes information. The most critical distinction is whether your boss is a reader or a listener.
Reader or listener?
Yeah, and Drucker uses historical examples to make this concrete. Franklin D. Roosevelt and Lyndon B. Johnson were classic listeners.
So what does that mean if you work for them?
If you walked into the Oval Office and handed them a brilliant, meticulously researched 60-page memo, it was a waste of paper. They needed you to sit down and verbally argue the points with them so they could hear the nuance.
And what if you have a reader?
Dwight D. Eisenhower was the ultimate reader. When he was Supreme Commander in Europe, his aides knew that he needed a 1-page written summary to read before they even started talking.
Right.
If you tried to verbally pitch Eisenhower an idea in the hallway, he couldn't process it effectively.
So if I have an Eisenhower boss and I try to pitch my big project over casual coffee chat, I'm going to fail. And I'm going to walk away thinking my boss is an idiot who doesn't get it.
Yep.
But the failure is entirely mine. I didn't lock my jigsaw piece into their strength. I didn't format the data in the way their brain is built to receive it.
Exactly. You have to adapt your output to their input mechanism. But to do this, to focus on your massive strengths, to manage your boss's strengths, and to contribute at a high level, you have to make a very difficult trade-off.
You have to drop some plates.
If you are focusing intensely on the big things, you have to let a lot of plates drop.
You have to ignore things. Which brings us to Chapter 5, First Things First.
This chapter is the requirement for ruthless, almost terrifying focus. Because time is a deficit, the author argues that effective executives do one thing at a time, and they do first things first.
This goes back to the story we opened with. The pharmaceutical CEO who only did 3 things in 11 years.
Yes. When he took over, the company was small, struggling, and operated in only one country. Over a decade, he didn't splinter his attention across 50 different modernization initiatives.
Right, he didn't hedge.
He picked the single most critical strategic objective. Maybe it was expanding into Europe or revamping the R&D pipeline. He put all of his energy into it until it was irreversibly established. Only then did he move to task number 2.
It sounds peaceful when you say it like that, but in reality, ignoring everything else while the building feels like it's on fire requires immense psychological fortitude. Where do we even start?
The first mechanical step is a concept Drucker calls sloughing off yesterday. We spend an inordinate amount of our time bailing out the decisions of the past.
The sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly.
Right.
A company launches a new software product. It's clunky, the market doesn't want it, but the VP of product has tied his entire ego to it.
Of course.
So instead of killing it, the company pulls its best engineers off of innovative future projects and forces them to endlessly patch and support this dying legacy product.
They are pouring their best resources into yesterday's failure.
Drucker says you must ask one brutal, clarifying question of every single activity, product, or process in your company. If we did not already do this, would we go into it now?
And if the honest answer is no?
You drop it immediately, or at least you curtail it sharply. You free up those resources to focus on tomorrow's opportunities.
Okay, dropping the failures of the past makes logical sense. But what about the future? As a modern professional, I don't just have one good idea. I usually have 5 exciting, viable projects I want to pursue. How do I choose between 5 good things?
This is where we run into the hardest concept in the book. It's not about setting priorities. Everyone loves setting priorities. It's about setting what Drucker calls posteriorities.
Posteriorities,
Hmm.
the things we deliberately decide to put in the back and not do.
Deciding what to ignore is agonizing because every single posteriority you set is secretly someone else's top priority.
Oh, that's so true.
If you stand up in a leadership meeting and say, "We are not doing the mobile app redesign this year," the head of mobile design is going to be furious. You are actively disappointing people.
Which is why leaders hedge. I see this constantly. Instead of making the hard choice, the leader says, well, let's put 10% of our budget into the app just to keep things moving. They try to do a little bit of everything to keep everyone happy.
And as a result, nothing gets done. The
Mhm.
resources are spread too thin to make an impact anywhere. Drucker argues that setting priorities and posteriorities is not actually a mathematical exercise.
Exactly.
You can't just build a cost-benefit matrix to make the pain go away. Setting posteriorities requires courage.
Courage, not logic. I love that. Because the data will always tell you to play it safe and hedge your bets.
The rules Drucker gives for prioritizing are all based on courage. First, pick the future over the past. Second, focus on opportunity over the problem. Third, choose your own direction rather than climbing on the industry bandwagon. And fourth, aim high for something that will make a fundamental difference rather than something that is safe and easy to accomplish.
If we are making these massive, high-stakes choices, abandoning the past, ignoring pressing problems to focus on future opportunities, we can't just shoot from the hip. The mechanics of how we make these rare decisions are critical.
Which transitions us perfectly into Chapter 6, the elements of decision-making. The core argument here is that effective executives do not actually make many decisions.
Really?
In fact, making too many decisions is a symptom of sloppy thinking and malorganization.
So if you were making 50 decisions a day, you are just an operator putting out fires.
Exactly. Effective executives make a few fundamental strategic decisions, and they follow a strict 5-element process to ensure they get it right.
Okay, let's walk through the 5 elements. What's element 1?
Element 1, determine if the situation is generic or an exception.
Meaning, is this a one-off problem, or is it a recurring structural issue disguised as an emergency?
Precisely. Drucker uses the example of a manufacturing plant. A pipe bursts, water goes everywhere, and the managers scramble to fix it. A week later, a different pipe bursts. They scramble again.
They are treating every leak as a unique exception.
But the generic problem is that the entire piping system wasn't designed for the water pressure they are putting through it. If you step back and fix the generic problem, redesigning the load limit, all the exceptions instantly disappear.
Stop patching the leaks and upgrade the pipe. I like it. What is element 2?
Establish boundary conditions. Before you decide how to solve a problem, you must define exactly what the decision must accomplish. What are the minimum non-negotiable goals it has to attain to be considered a success?
Give me a historical example of boundary conditions in action.
The book contrasts a spectacular failure with a massive success. The failure is the Schlieffen Plan in World War I.
Oh, military history. Let's go.
So the German general staff faced a nightmare scenario, a two-front war against France and Russia. They set a strict boundary condition. They could not split their army.
Okay.
The plan was to offer token, delaying resistance to Russia in the east, throw the overwhelming bulk of their forces at France to knock them out in a few weeks, and then use the railways to rush the army back east to face Russia.
So the absolute boundary condition is defeat France first, do not divert troops.
Right. But when Russia mobilized much faster than anticipated, Russian troops started pushing into East Prussia. The German Junkers, the aristocratic elite who owned massive estates in East Prussia, panicked. They set up a massive political howl demanding protection for their lands.
And the military leadership caved.
They caved. They diverted crucial divisions away from the French front to go protect the Junkers in the east. By doing so, they violated their own boundary condition. They didn't have enough men to knock out France. They got bogged down in brutal trench warfare, and they ultimately lost the war. They compromised the core objective for political expediency.
Now contrast that with a success.
Drucker points to Franklin D. Roosevelt's handling of a massive, unprecedented power failure blackout. FDR set strict boundary conditions for the recovery effort. He refused to compromise the core objective restoring power systematically just to appease noisy political factions demanding immediate ad hoc fixes for their specific districts.
He held the line.
He held the line, met the boundary conditions, and the grid was restored efficiently.
That perfectly sets up element 3, which is focus on what is right, not what is acceptable.
This is where most managers fail. If you start a decision-making process by worrying about what the board of directors will accept or what the labor union will accept, you will unconsciously negotiate against yourself before you even draft the proposal.
You water it down.
You must figure out what the objectively right answer is first. Only then do you worry about the compromises needed to get it passed.
And element 4.
Convert the decision into action. A decision is not actually a decision until someone is specifically assigned to carry it out with a deadline. And this is the secret ingredient with the right incentives.
Because if you change the policy but leave the old bonus structure in place, human behavior will not change.
Exactly. Drucker cites Theodore Vail, the visionary early leader of the Bell telephone system. Vail made the radical strategic decision that Bell should become a regulated public monopoly. But he knew that just issuing a memo wouldn't work. His managers were trained to fight government regulators tooth and nail.
So what did he do?
Vail built action into the decision. He completely changed the reward structures. He promoted managers who successfully worked with public utility commissions.
He aligned their wallets with his strategy.
He did. And finally, element 5, feedback. You cannot rely on polished, abstract reports to tell you if the decision is working. Reports are filtered.
Right.
You must go out and look for yourself. A military commander doesn't just read a logistical report that says the troops are being fed. He goes to the mess hall and tastes the food.
I want to circle back to something you said about element 3, focusing on what is right rather than what is acceptable.
Okay.
So if my team is facing a complex problem, my instinct is to get everyone in a room, present the data, and try to build consensus. We are taught that good leaders build consensus, but you're implying that's wrong.
According to Drucker, it is not just wrong, it is the fastest way to make a catastrophic decision. And this brings us to our final and, frankly, most counterintuitive section, Chapter 7, Effective Decisions. This chapter completely shatters the myth of consensus.
Let's shatter it.
Yeah.
Every management textbook says first get the facts, then build consensus.
And Drucker says that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how human cognition works. You cannot get the facts first because you cannot gather facts without a criterion of relevance.
Meaning?
You literally don't know what data to look for until you have a hypothesis. Therefore, the effective executive does not start with facts. They start with opinions.
But opinions are heavily biased. They're just gut feelings.
Yes, an opinion is simply an untested hypothesis. But you need that hypothesis to figure out what to measure. The genius of executive decision-making is finding the right measurement to test the opinion against reality.
Give me an example of finding the right measurement.
The book uses Robert McNamara's tenure at the Department of Defense. When McNamara arrived, the Pentagon was a bureaucratic nightmare. The military procurement system tried to manage every single item equally.
Like everything from tanks to paper clips.
Exactly. We are talking about millions of individual items, from multi-million-dollar jet engines down to the brass buckles on a soldier's belt. Standard accounting treated them all as line items.
That sounds like a recipe for total paralysis.
It was. McNamara realized that standard accounting was the wrong measurement. He analyzed the data and discovered a staggering asymmetry. Roughly 4% of the physical items in the inventory accounted for 90% of the total budget and 90% of actual combat readiness.
The 80-20 rule, but magnified to an extreme. 4% of the items drove the entire military machine.
By changing the measurement, he revolutionized the Pentagon. He applied probability and averages to the 96% of trivial items, basically automating their resupply, and focused intense, rigorous management exclusively on that critical 4%.
Wow.
He started with an opinion that the system was broken, and he found the right measurement to prove it.
Okay, so we start with an opinion and we find a measurement to test it. But where does the lack of consensus come in? Why do we actively want people to disagree with us?
To explain why polite consensus is so dangerous, let's look at the actual mechanics of solving a complex problem.
Okay, so if I'm trying to solve a massive logistical issue and everyone in the boardroom immediately nods and agrees with my first proposal, I should be worried.
You should be terrified. Making a complex executive decision based on polite consensus is like trying to perform intricate surgery with a dull butter knife. It's clumsy, it requires blunt force, and it's going to leave a massive bloody mess.
Oh, I see where this is going. So if consensus is the butter knife,
Yes.
disagreement is the whetstone. Disagreement provides the friction. When someone vehemently argues against my plan, it forces me to defend it, to find the flaws, to refine the logic. It sparks. And that friction is the only thing that sharpens my initial dull opinion into a razor-sharp surgeon's scalpel.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. You need the surgeon's scalpel to cut through the complexity of the problem, and you cannot forge that scalpel without the friction of disagreement.
You have to demand conflict.
You do. Drucker details 3 specific reasons why disagreement is vital. First, it is the only safeguard against the executive becoming a prisoner of the organization.
What does that mean?
If everyone around the table is smiling and agreeing with you, they are probably playing politics. They are special pleaders trying to get budget or favor from the boss. Disagreement breaks that spell.
Now the second reason.
It provides alternative courses of action. If you go with the one consensus plan and it fails upon contact with reality, you are completely lost. You have to start from scratch. But if you had 3 passionately argued alternatives during the planning phase, you already have fully developed fallback options ready to deploy.
And the third reason is about creativity, right?
It stimulates the imagination. Drucker uses the example of how a top-tier law firm trains its junior associates. When a brilliant young lawyer joins the firm, the senior partner doesn't ask them to write a brief defending their own client.
Or they do.
The very first task assigned to the junior associate is to draft the strongest, most impenetrable case for the opponent.
That is brilliant. It forces the young lawyer to step completely out of their own self-righteousness. You cannot defeat an opponent until you fully understand the brutal reality of their strongest argument. You sharpen your scalpel on the opponent's whetstone.
Exactly. But let me ask you this. What happens if, after all the debate, the friction, the sharpening of the scalpel, the executive looks at the problem and realizes that no action is actually necessary?
Wait, is that an option? Can the best decision be to just sit on your hands and wait?
Yes, but Drucker has a very strict rule for this. You act if the benefits greatly outweigh the costs and the risks. If they don't, and if the situation is likely to resolve itself through natural attrition, you do not act at all. But here's the absolute rule. You never half-act.
What does half-acting look like? A compromise.
Half-acting is the ultimate failure of courage. To use your surgery metaphor, taking out half an appendix is infinitely worse than doing nothing at all.
Because it's still infected.
Right. If you do nothing, the patient might recover, or they might get worse. If you take out half the appendix, you guarantee a massive fatal infection. You either operate or you don't. You never compromise just to look like you are doing something.
That level of binary discipline is intimidating.
Yeah.
And as we talk about this, I can't help but think about the modern context. With AI and predictive algorithms getting so advanced, aren't computers just going to make all these agonizing high-stakes decisions for us eventually?
It's fascinating because Drucker actually predicted the impact of the computer age decades before it fully arrived.
Really?
Yeah. He noted that the computer will absolutely not replace the executive. Why? Because the computer is essentially a mechanical moron. It can only handle quantifiable data, logic, addition, and subtraction. It cannot handle ambiguity, courage, or human judgment.
So what role does the computer actually play?
The computer will handle all the vast, exhausting mathematical calculations, and by doing so, it will strip away our ability to hide behind the math. It will expose when we are just patching leaky pipes. It will actually force human beings to stop making ad hoc adaptations and step up to make the real, high-risk strategic decisions.
So technology isn't going to make us obsolete. It's actually going to force us to become more human. It's going to demand that we lean heavier into our uniquely human traits: judgment, courage, empathy, and the willingness to engage in productive disagreement.
Precisely. The mechanical work will be automated, leaving only the executive work.
Okay, this has been an incredibly dense, paradigm-shifting journey. Let's synthesize the biggest realizations from this deep dive for you, the listener. If you are hearing this on your commute or at your desk, here is what you need to take away. Effectiveness is absolutely not an innate talent. You do not have to be born a visionary genius to be highly effective. It is a daily, mechanical discipline.
A discipline of focus and courage.
Yes. It starts with facing the brutal truth of the time deficit. You have to log your time objectively. You have to use modern tactics like Akshat Khatri's phone ban and 90-minute blocks to physically reclaim your focus from the organizational gravity that wants to suck you into the core of the plan.
And once you have that time, you look outward. You ask what you can contribute to the results that live outside the building.
And to make that contribution, You have to look at that intellectual jigsaw puzzle. You have to stop trying to sand down your own weaknesses and instead figure out how to lock your wild, protruding, asymmetric strengths into the needs of your organization.
And finally, you must have the courage to demand disagreement. You must use conflict as a whetstone to sharpen your opinions into a scalpel, and you must possess the discipline to never, ever half-act.
It is a complete mental rewiring. We have to stop equating movement with progress.
Because doing things right is merely efficiency. Getting the right things done is effectiveness.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought.
Yeah.
I want you to open your calendar tomorrow morning. Look at the endless blocks of meetings, the recurring tasks, the projects that feel heavy and stagnant. And I want you to ask yourself one brutal question. Which yesterday's success are you stubbornly pouring your precious energy into, purely out of ego and comfort? And what would happen if you simply had the courage to let it go?
Answering that single question may be the most effective thing you do all year.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the effective executive. Keep questioning your routines, fire up your thrusters to break free from that organizational gravity, and we will catch you on the next one.